meeting.
All right, ready? Let's do it. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. My name is Drew Jacobs. I'm the Watershed Programs Coordinator for Friends of the Upper Delaware River. We're here joined by Jeff Skelding, FUDR Angling Program Leader, Brent Gotsch, Technical Advisor of Reservoir Releases from New York City Department of Environmental Protection, and Brenan Tarrier, Professional Engineer for New York State DEC, Division of Water, Bureau of Water Resource Management. We have a jam-packed schedule, some great presentations. So without further delay, I'll pass it on over to Jeff Skelding.
What am I hitting here? Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I think we got a pretty good turnout tonight. I am Jeff Skelding with FUDR. Many of you know me. I know many of you. My challenge is I'm going to try to just give some historical context here and strike the balance between those of you who know a lot about this stuff and maybe some who don't know as much. So, and I'm going to try to go as fast as I can because I'd like to give Brenan and Brent ample time and then have ample time at the end of the presentations so we can open it up for question and answer. So here's a little bit of historical context. You know, this whole FFMP train started rolling, 100 years ago when the city had to expand and a growing city needed more water, and they started heading north and west, and they ended up, coming eventually into the Delaware watershed. And around 1931, in 1931, there was a lawsuit. There were some concerns about the construction of the reservoirs and the down basin states and what would happen to the river and the water supply. The 1931 lawsuit resulted in a Supreme Court decree, and then in '54, it happened again with a further expansion. And so the '54 decree amended the '31 decree. What did they do? So the city the city needed water to satisfy the consumer demand in a growing urban area. So that opened up or gave permission for the reservoirs to be constructed. You see the years there were Neversink-Pipacton, 54, Kansville, and 64. And some of the highlights of that decree, 54 decree, was the city got up to 800 million gallons a day. New Jersey got an allocation as well. This is when we got the Montague flow target, which I know many anglers of the Upper Delaware are very familiar with and pay keen attention to. Also set up the decree party system. So it's the 4 states that border the river plus New York City. These are the major decision makers on all things Delaware River management. And one distinction here I want to point out is there's also something called the Delaware River Basin Commission, and that is different but engaged and part of the decree party system, but they are governed by the 4 states, just like you see here, but not New York City. Their 5th party is the federal government, the Army Corps of Engineers, so sometimes there's some confusion there. The decree also set up a very important office, the Office of the Delaware River Master, under USGS authority, and they were created to oversee a significant portion of the 54 decree. Fast forward now, the reservoirs are in place. Water's coming to New York City. Water's going down the Delaware River. And we got to the 1960s. Many of you know we had a big drought then, and the drought conditions were not really contemplated in the earlier years. And so the parties got together and said, we got to think about this, how are we going to handle drought in a world that's always changing weather-wise. And it took a while, but in '83 they got together and developed something called the Good Faith Agreement, and that set some new requirements for releases and diversions during drought periods. I think Brenan may talk, Brenan or Brent might talk about the drought can be a tricky term here. There's ambient drought where counties and states say we're in a drought, but there's also reservoir drought. It has to do with the water levels in the reservoir at any given time. When they get too low, they kick into a drought, the drought requirements of the FFMP. So that can sometimes be confusing. Releases is the term for the water that's coming out of the dam into the tailwaters and all the way down to the Delaware estuary, and diversions is the term for the water that is removed from the reservoirs through the tunnel system and sent down to the city and surrounding communities for water supply. The Trenton flow target also came about here. This is specific to the northward migration of the salt front. Many of you have heard about that. And, you know, this is a good example of when we think about the FFMP and the upper Delaware River wild trout fishery, it's really important that we have some understanding of the entire Delaware River Basin in the context of the FFMP. And not look at just the tailwaters in isolation, because the FFMP is impacted by the water supply needs of every state up and down the system. So, and one thing affects another. The salt front has implications, for example, for releases up here, particularly at Cannonsville Reservoir. We're going further forward here. Now the tailwater fishery is being discovered. There may be some folks on the phone here that were around during those times. And the reservoirs and the dams, of course, resulted in the creation of what we consider a world-class tailwater fishery. And I know many of you on the call here enjoy the fishing up here quite a bit and have for, in some cases, decades. It's a great fishery and, you know, a tailwater fishery, and the reservoirs and the dams are directly responsible for that. But early on, you know, the fishery was not, I would say it was not discounted. It just was not as well known. The thinking around the reservoir management plans was not concentrated on the fishery like it is now. But as the years went by, it has become increasingly important. And I think in the current FFMP is a great example of how far we've come when we think about everybody who wants this water. And it's not just for fishing, obviously, it's for all kinds of needs. I think the fishery has been elevated to a level that, where it's quite important now to the decree parties, and that a lot of that has to do with the conservation community and a lot of people on this phone call. We've had a whole bunch of plans for the reservoirs over the decades. Some of them not so good for the fishery, some of them better. And then we landed on the FFMP in 2007. So that was first year of the FFMP. That has changed since. We'll talk about that. So it is the plan that governs the operations of the New York City Delaware River Basin reservoirs. The conservation community had a very large part in the development of this thing. And you can see there some of the people involved. Many of you know Peter Colasar, Jim Serio, who might be on the call tonight, and then the conservation organizations were also engaged. So it was a pretty, in my opinion, the conservation community is not a decree party, and yet we were, essentially had a seat at the table to represent the trout fishery when we developed this plan that we're currently operating under. So it does all kinds of things. It's, again, not just fisheries. It's, obviously it has water supply context for sure. That's a major driving force, not just in New York City, but it also has implications for New Jersey's water supply. It's got fisheries protection in it, obviously. And along the way, as flooding became, as the weather has changed over the years, we had the big floods in the early 2000s. When we got up here into the 2017 FFMP, it actually was modified to address flood mitigation up here, especially in the shadow of the dams and the communities in the tailwaters. This is the term many of you heard, voids. That's kind of the shorthand term for flood mitigation components of the 2017 FFMP. Really important concept. I say it all the time up here in multiple audiences. The FFMP was really created for the fish. I'm talking about the tailwater habitat provisions of the FFMP, which is one piece of a much larger plan. And it was created for the fish and not the fishing. So as many of you know, there are times when the fishing's not so great up here, but the stream scientists will tell you that the fish are probably okay. It's really important to understand that. And, after all, even though it's a tailwater, it is a river, and rivers behave the way rivers behave. So that fourth bullet there is something we talk about all the time. And so we are currently under 2017 FFMP. It's up for renewal in 2028, and that's going to be a whole discussion among the conservation community up here about how we sort of line up and talk about that and work with the decree parties on the next iteration of this thing. I want folks to see this. This is Peter Colasar put this together for the FUDR conference last fall. There's a lot of discussion among the angling community about the good old days, what the releases were, 30 years ago. You have a lot of people who remember a lot of different things. And I thought this was an important slide to show, and you can read it for yourself, but you can see if you just look at the releases at the reservoirs there and you look at the plans and the years of those plans, you can see the trajectory. This is under normal conditions. Sometimes there's floods and sometimes there's drought, but under normal summer conditions, you can see that, the obvious number that jumps out there is FFMP 2017. When I got here in 2013, there was the big conversation in the angling community was, we'd love to see 600 at Hale Eddy. Well, that we're close, right? Now it's 500 at the Kenzo release. So just want that to sink in a little bit because gives you a little bit of empirical data about, when many of you, all of us have been in conversations about, decades ago, was the fishing better? Were the releases better for the fishing? This just gives you some context for that discussion. For the tailwaters in the 2017 FFMP, the 2007 and 2017, it has a habitat protection plan. Not every tailwater in this country, contemplates that. And I think the FFMP is a pretty sophisticated, science-based habitat protection plan, and it's also incredibly complicated, right? We're talking about 4 states, city of New York. There's a lot of things to think about here, and to have a solid habitat protection plan in a much larger water management plan like this, I think, is a good step forward. Also, in 2017, we had 2 banks created. I think many people are familiar with the Thermal Mitigation Bank. And that came about. It took 2 years, so around 2019. And this is what Brenan's going to talk about from DEC. So I'm not even going to spend any time on it at all, except to say, it requires that we have a certain temperature, maximum temperature at the Lordville USGS gauge, Lordville Bridge on the main stem, not to exceed 75 degrees Fahrenheit. So that again, Brennan will talk more about that in detail. Also, it's a rapid flow bank. Many of you know the term yo-yo releases, where the river would go up and down really quick. I didn't have a chance to put a picture in here, but we have some of those classic pictures where one day, it's bank to bank, and the next day it's half that. And you wonder what happens to the fish and the water temperatures when that happens. This bank is to address that. And important to know, it only applies to directed releases, which are those releases that are made for the Montague target. So when we have a situation where we're anticipating a rapid flow change during a directed release period, this bank is available to kind of even out things, make that shock effect a little less so. This is my last slide, and then I'm going to turn it over to Brent. So, what's next? It's 2026. We're looking at the 2017 FFMP was a 10-year plan with a 5-year re-up. That has happened already, midterm re-up. Now 2028 is the next time discussion opens up and the renewal has to occur. One thing that has to occur per the 2017 plan is that these 6 studies need to be completed, and I'll let Brenan and Brent tell me if I'm saying something wrong here, but it's my understanding that I think the decree parties did have an agreement in the midterm review that, we're not going to see any changes to the current FFMP until these studies are completed. And so it's, I'm not going to go into each one of these, but, there's only, you can see here that, there's only one complete, and, we've got, we're on the clock here, so a good question for our other speakers might be, what do we anticipate that these are going to get completed in time for, I think it's May of 2028. So the one study here that I will point out is this IERQ study. Things have changed. I was talking to Brenan about this the other day. The world has changed since the original IERQ, which is the interim excess release quantity, and it sort of addresses the question of how much available water is there, how much does the city need, what is the sustainable yield of the reservoirs, and it's going to be an interesting discussion. And for those of us, that are focused on the tailwaters and the angling in the tailwaters, we're very interested in understanding what gets discussed here and what the plan, what the thinking is, and what this might look like. So I think they're in a scoping stage now, and a draft is under. It looks like internal draft is complete. So there will be an opportunity for public comment. So I will point out to you that I think of all these studies, they're all important, but the IERQ is most interesting to us. And we will, FUDR will be keeping tabs on it. Other organizations will keeping tabs on it. We'll let everyone know as we can how it's going, and look for opportunities for public input when the time comes. With that, Drew, I think I'm going to turn it over to Brent.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Up next, we have Brent Gotsch, Technical Advisor for Reservoir Releases, New York City Department of Environmental Protection. Got a slideshow for you. Awesome.
Okay, Drew, can you see my screen okay? It's in presenter mode, everything?
Yep, everything looks good.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you, Drew, for the introduction. As Drew said, my name is Brent Gotsch. I'm a technical advisor with the New York City Department of Environmental Protection's Bureau of Water Supply. I'm just going to jump right into my presentation. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about our Operations Support Tool, or OST as it's referred to. OST is basically just software that allows DEP to evaluate all aspects of the New York City water supply system. So that includes our reservoirs, our aqueducts, all the infrastructure associated with the water supply system. There's several main components that go into OST. That's the near real-time data that's collected for it by our personnel and also our equipment that's out there. And we also have a couple models that actually kind of form the heart of OST. There's a water quantity model that's known as the OASIS model. There's also a water quality model. That's the CQUAL W2 model. Those kind of form, as I said, the heart of OST. We also look at inflow forecasts, so how much inflow we expect to go into the reservoirs. So those are the main components, but there's also several key elements too that are associated with it. That includes the actual inflows that are going into the reservoir, also the demand that we have, not just from in-city consumers, but we also have a wholesale water a program for upstate communities in Westchester, Putnam, Ulster, and Orange County. And we have some customers up there in municipalities that purchase water from us wholesale. So there's a demand consideration there. We look at the storage of the reservoirs, as well as the reservoir storage zones, which I'll talk more about in a moment. Also the aqueduct capacity, that puts a constraint upon our system. We certainly can't divert more water than the aqueduct allows. There's operating rules that we have to consider. Jeff introduced it to us, and we're going to talk more about it it over the course of this evening, which is the 2017 Flexible Flow Management Program here in the Delaware system of reservoirs. But our Catskill system also has a operating protocols. The Ashokan Reservoir is the interim release protocol that also we have to take into consideration as we're operating the system. And then finally, reservoir balancing is always on our mind. It's good policy and good reservoir management to ensure that the reservoirs kind of come down in a consistent fashion so that they're roughly equal in capacity. What you don't want to have happen is to have one reservoir completely full and another one completely empty. If the full reservoir has to go offline for some reason, whether for repair or maintenance or a dam safety issue, and you can't access that water, then you're kind of in trouble. So we try to keep the reservoirs coming down in a fairly consistent fashion. The one thing I want to pull, actually, before I go any further, I just want to say, so we feed all this information into OST. OST runs its calculations, it does its, its thing, its computations, and it spits back out to us some like advice essentially about where it sees the system going, and then provides us with some guidance on where it thinks we should draw water from, where we should release water from, etc. Now, having said that, though, this is the operations support tool, not the operations decision tool. Even though OST is a fantastic tool, it's created a tremendous amount of efficiency in our system. We spent a lot of money, many millions of dollars developing it and continuing to keep it, as good as it can be. But it's really kind of the envy of water supply purveyors all across the country, perhaps even the world. But having said that, though, there's still it requires human beings to make decisions. We have experienced engineers, experienced reservoir managers, experienced executives who have years, if not decades worth of experience and institutional knowledge, and also understand the facts on the ground as they develop that ultimately make decisions in conjunction with OST. So again, we're very proud of OST. OST provides us a lot of great guidance for how to do things, but it's still human beings that are ultimately making decisions on how the system is operated. So if you go to the FFMP, and you'll find this figure in here. And this is the combined storage for Cansfield, Pepacton, and Neversink reservoirs. And so over the course of the year, we average out what those storages are, and you would basically draw a line somewhere on this chart and see where the storage would be at any given time. So for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up. Everything below that green line that you see on your screen, that is something. Everything below that is some sort of drought designation. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into drought and drought operations tonight. Don't have time for it. It could be a presentation for another time. But simply put, think of it this way. Everything below that green line, there has restrictions on how much water can be released, how much water can be diverted, and it gets more restrictive as you go down towards drought emergency. Between the green and the blue line, that's our normal operating period. This is where we typically are in over the course of the year. It is where we want to be as well. And this is where sort of those normal releases, normal operations occur. And I'll show in the release tables coming up a little bit more how that looks like. Now above that blue line, that's our spill mitigation storage zone. So as Jeff had mentioned a little bit earlier, that we have some of our neighbors downstream of our reservoirs who have some concerns about downstream flooding. So in an effort to try to help with those concerns, we've instituted during certain times of the year a conditional seasonal storage objective of up to 25% voids being in our Delaware system reservoirs. And these are instituted during the most hydrologically active times of the year. So the winter, the spring, where we have, a lot of the rain, the snow, rain on snow melt. So basically this time of year, right? We have a lot of the precipitation in the system. And those voids allow us to capture some of that runoff, which helps lower elevations of floods potentially downstream. And if you notice, the blue line has kind of a funky curve there too, compared to the other lines. That's again taking into consideration the different periods of the year where the hydrologically active conditions are. And also I want to point out now that we want all of our reservoirs across our system, not just in the Delaware, but the Catskill, our Croton system as well, to be full by June 1st. June 1st is the start of our water year. It runs from June 1 to May 31. And we want our reservoirs to be filled at that point in time so we can manage through the drier and warmer summer and fall months. So also in the FFMP, you'll see figure 2 here. We don't need to go into too much detail other than just to know that if you go into that L1 storage area that we saw in the previous slide, you can further divide it into 3 separate sections, L1A, B, and C, and it has implications for releases, which also coming up. So right here we have our 4G release table. We have a total of 7 release tables that I would say are. Oh, sorry, we're getting a little feedback here. Can you hear me okay? Okay.
Yep.
All right, good. Sorry, I heard a little feedback. I was hoping nothing was going on. Anyway, so we have about 7 of these release tables during normal or non-drought conditions. Table 4G is the one that we're typically in, again, during most of the year, especially if there's no concerns about drought or anything like that. And I think they're fairly simple to understand. Hopefully you can see my pointer on the screen here, but if not, you can follow along. We have a table for each of the reservoirs, Kansville, Pepacton, and Neversink. And depending upon what storage zone that we're in, L2 or one of the L1s, then you can determine where your releases are to divide it up by season, summer, fall, winter, spring, as well as subseasonal times, these different periods of the year. So just for example, I'll take Pepacton. So right now, Pepacton happens to be in the L1C storage zone. Today is March 19th, so we travel across the chart here, and Pepacton will be releasing about 100 CFS during this period of time, given this storage zone. So that's essentially how they work. So right here, you see on your screen 2 additional release tables. I didn't want to put them all up. It'd just be too busy of a slide. But again, the tables run from 4A to 4G. These, again, for normal non-drought conditions. The key takeaway from this slide is really that the releases go down as we descend from table 4G towards table 4A. One of the questions I think we get a lot is, what is the decision-making process? What triggers us from moving to 4G to say to 4F and 4F to 4E and on and on? Well, so what we do is we look at things like it's really a function of hydrologic conditions. You look at things like precipitation and stream flow, inflow into the reservoirs, as well as reservoir storage itself. And what we do is we look at this every single day and we plot it. And if we notice that it's starting to go in a direction where storage is going down, inflow is going down, there's a forecast for precipitation isn't there. If it looks like it's trending in a dry position over a period of time, then we'll make a decision on whether we should move down a table or not. So one of the questions you might have is, well, why don't we just stay in 4G the entire time and then just go into drought operations when we go to L3? And that's a valid question. So the reason is we want to conserve water first and foremost. Additionally, under tables 4F, E, and on, they have, even though they're less than 4G, those releases are still higher than any of the drought designations, so L3, L4, and L5. So you're going to get more water for fisheries and on for in these tables as opposed to going to the drought tables. Additionally, these tables were developed as part of the Joint Fisheries White Paper between New York State DEC and Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission, and they're meant to really mimic how things happen naturally in the stream. As was kind of pointed out earlier, what the last thing you want to have happen is to have really high releases during a table 4G, and then all of a sudden drop down to a table L3. You really want to have kind of a more gradual decrease to make sure fish don't get stranded outside the main channel in some of these pocket pools or whatever, and also just to help the general ecology. So that's kind of the thought process for how we do with the decrease of the tables here. So every month we release a summary page to let folks know kind of what we're thinking about with OST and what OST is sort of telling us. It usually comes out about the middle of the month, and this is the most recent one. It just came out a couple days ago. And if you're interested in looking at it, it's available on our website. The URL is there on the screen. I'm sure if you Google, New York City DEP OST monthly summary page, will be the first thing that pops up. But anyway, I'm not going to go into great detail in every one of these sections, but I'll just talk in general terms how the arithmetic works. So on that first section there, it's help us determine what our mass balance is. So we take the combined storage of Pepacton, Kansville, and Neversink, or PCN, as we often abbreviate it to. We add what we expect the inflow to be to June 1st. We minus the diversion that we expect to have to June 1st, and then also minus what we need to get to the 100% target on June 1st. And we do that arithmetic and we get our mass balance there. And we take that mass balance, we divide it by the number of days to June 1st, and that kind of gives us a number for releases in both MGD and CFS. The next table, or next section, I should say there, it shows what the current usable storage is for PCN reservoirs combined, as well as individually for the reservoirs, what storage zone we have to be in. And then that bottom table there shows you what table we are, what storage zone, and what the releases are supposed to be. That table on the right there, that's actually the back page if you're scrolling on it. For the monthly summary page. A lot of times this is kind of a null section because this really only comes into account if we're in a situation where we're in L1. Now we happen to be in an L1 situation now. So it just shows basically the arithmetic here, what the excess is over that CSSO. So that's really fundamentally what this page is. And again, you can certainly go to the website and see, you look at it in more detail. So Jeff had asked me to talk a little bit about the IERQ. So just give you a little bit of background. So back in the 1954 decree, the original excess release quantity was instituted. And as Jeff alluded to, it's changed a little bit over time. And so under the current 2017 FFMP, we're operating under what's referred to as an interim excess release quantity. And what I like to the way I like to try to explain is I like to tell folks that the IERQ, think of it as kind of like a 10 billion gallon bucket of water. And each section of that bucket essentially has a certain amount of water allocated for different reasons. Just as New York City has to meet a flow target at the Montague stream gauge, DRBC has to meet a flow target at Trenton. So that water there for the Trenton equivalent flow objective is to help meet that target. The thermal mitigation section there, that you're familiar with that's to help the fisheries on those warm days in the summer to keep the waters cool for them. The rapid flow change mitigation bank, as Jeff said, is kind of help throttle that water up and down, so it's not these really big dumps of water and then really big stopping of it. It's kind of help the ecology. There's also a New Jersey diversion amelioration bank. Just as New York City is allowed to take a diversion, New Jersey is as well, and this is to assist when New Jersey's diversion is exhausted during drought conditions. So that's fundamentally how the IERQ is working right now. We have a set of water or amount of water, I should say, for each of these purposes. So I want to talk briefly about PST. That's the planning support tool. It's similar to OST. It was developed by DEP as a public-facing model for the Delaware Basin. So the main difference between OST and PST is that OST looks at the entire New York City water supply system, but is not publicly made available. There's unfortunately some security, confidential information behind it that if the wrong people got a hold of it, it could be a very serious security issue. So it's something that we don't put out to the public beyond, the summary page that I showed you earlier. However, we did develop what's referred to as the plan support tool that is public facing. And what's nice about this is it looks at the entire Delaware River Basin. So everything from the headwaters all the way down to the Delaware Bay. And it's developed using the same protocols and parameters as OST. And when you run the modeling, the computations, they come out either exactly the same or extremely close. DRBC, among many other entities, use PST. So it's a tool that's out there that if you're interested in using, you certainly can. You can do that. You can go to the DRBC webpage there. DRBC is kind of the keeper of PST. So if you have questions about accessing that, you can reach out to them. I do believe you need specialized software though to run it. Unfortunately, it's not something you just download to your laptop and use, but you can reach out for the DRBC if you're interested in knowing more about PST. Also want to give a shout out to DRBC for creating the schematic here. I'm putting it up not to try to confuse you, even though it does look confusing. It's really just meant to show the complexity of the Delaware River Basin. I think all too often a lot of folks think that it's just New York City and maybe one or two other entities that make the calls on how water is managed in the Delaware. And unfortunately, it could not be further from the truth. There's upper basin reservoirs, lower basin reservoirs, flow targets at different spots. New York has its diversion, New Jersey has its diversion at the Delaware Raritan Canal, where they can pull water further inland out of basin for water supply. There's also concerns about the salt front, as Jeff had mentioned earlier. That's the saline water that moves upstream during drought conditions. That could affect a number of municipalities who use the Delaware for drinking water, not the least of which is the city of Philadelphia, who has deep concerns about that, rightfully so. So it's a very complex system is really what I'm getting at here. And we have a number of constituencies too. So certainly first and foremost in our mind of New York City is the out-of-basin diversion. So our customers in the city itself, as well as our wholesale customers upstate. New Jersey also has an out-of-basin diversion, and the folks that rely upon water from the Delaware River from there. We also have anglers, so many of the folks on this call here, and other recreationalists, so people who are interested in boating and things like that. They are, they have a concern about how the water is managed. As I mentioned before, the residents who live downstream of the dams have concerns about flooding. So, they have an interest as well. A number of environmental groups, Riverkeeper, Delaware Riverkeeper, Partnership for the Delaware Estuary, Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed, FUDR, I think Trout Unlimited was on the call here. I saw there another one. I mean, this is just not an exhaustive list by any means. I mean, there's many, many interest groups out there that have a deep concern about how the water is managed in the system. And that includes the basin states, so New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, and New York State. They either have a legal right to the water, or they're looking to get excess or more water, I should say, for irrigation or for industry, power generation. There's any number, water supply. There's any number of reasons that the different states are looking for additional water. And again, all very valid reasons. And New York City also is a very heavily regulated entity as well. It's not just New York City itself coming up with a lot of the rules and regulations for how this is operated. New York State DEC regulates us for our releases and dam safety, and they're very concerned about the fisheries, of course. Also, New York State Department of Health has a deep concern about the quality of water, and making sure that we get high quality water to our customers as well as downstream. The Delaware River Masters, we had said, has a concern about, or an interest, I should say, in making sure that we have the Montague flow target met and can call upon us to release water if that target's not met. So there's a lot of people looking over our shoulder. It's not just us doing this on our own. Some additional obligations and considerations. I'll go for some of these quickly, so I know we talked about them already. There's that flow target at Montague that's been around since the 1954 decree. And, if natural inflow and those conservation releases aren't meeting that flow target, the Delaware River Master can compel us to, release extra water to make sure that that's met. What a lot of people don't realize is that we actually own and operate a wastewater treatment facility in the city of Port Jervis. This has actually resulted in the 1931 Supreme Court decree. This has no effect and no benefit really even for our drinking water. We're mandated to operate to ensure that there's non-contaminated water from wastewater going downstream in the Delaware. We've maintained this and operated this for decades and decades. Again, we have to make releases based upon the position of the salt front during drought emergency. That's part of the FFMP. We have those seasonal voids and CSSOs for flood mitigation, again, as part of the FFMP. And as I mentioned earlier, with OST, our forecasting, our modeling, they're the best they've ever been. But unfortunately, they're still not perfect. We do not know exactly what the hydrologic conditions are going to be month to month or throughout the year. We really have to assume that conditions are going to turn dry at some point and be conservative about our water usage. Here's like a perfect, I'll just say this, our models are very good a week out and even up to 2 weeks. But beyond that, it really, the accuracy or the skill, as it's referred to in the modeling world, tends to drop off very precipitously. So under a long-term horizon, it's very difficult for us to determine what the conditions are actually going to be throughout the year. As a case study for this, so all the models, New York City models as well as other models, back in the summer of 2024 said that the fall was going to be wetter than normal or a normal year. And what was the reality? Well, we all saw what happened. It was one of the worst droughts that we've had in years, and none of the models caught it. So that's, again, a perfect example of why we have to be very cautious with how we use the water throughout the year. And just to finish up, I want to say we are working on trying to improve our modeling and our forecasting skill. We're always looking to do things better. To that end, we've contracted with a number of entities. The Research Triangle Institute is helping us on the software end of things, is my understanding. Another group that I'm more familiar with and I work closer with is the Centers for Western and Weather Water Extremes, or CW3E. This is an outfit out of the Centers this is an outfit out of the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at UC San Diego. They are the foremost authorities on just weather prediction, but particularly with atmospheric rivers, which as the name suggests, is rivers in the sky of precipitation and moisture. Very common on the West Coast, but they're also pretty common on the Eastern Seaboard too, including the Northeast. So our goal with them is to see if we can take their expertise, their models, their forecasts, and see if we can translate them to what we experience here on the East Coast. Um, Outside of hurricanes and nor'easters, atmospheric rivers are actually the cause for some of the greatest precipitation events that we experience. So we're still very early on in this project. There's some initially promising results, but we still have a long way to go. And this is going to be a multi-year project to see if we can, get any additional benefit out of our models for long-term accuracy. So that's all I have for right now. I'm going to stop sharing and I'll turn it back over to Drew. And at the end of Brent's presentation, I'll be happy to answer questions with him.
All right. Thank you, Brent. Next up, we have Brennan Tarrier, professional engineer, New York State DEC, Division of Water, Bureau of Water Resource Management. He's prepared a presentation for us. Looks like it's up on the screen now.
All right.
Brennan, whenever you're ready.
Good evening, everybody. You guys can see that okay?
Yep.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Brennan Tarrier, New York State DEC. I have been working on the Reservoir Leases program here since 2007. So I have some background in it. I've met with a lot of you many times at FUDR things and other things. And so here I'm here to present a bit about the background and the implementation of the thermal release bank that's in the flexible flow management program that Jeff spoke about earlier. So the thermal problem in the upper Delaware is that the conservation releases are often adequate to supply flow and temperature for what you would call like normal days, not too hot, not too sunny. But when it's hot and sunny, especially if it's a heat wave, so you have warm day after warm day, there are times when it is the temperatures are excessive, either for natural trout biology or for the sport of fishing. So you don't want to fish on days where there might be days where it's too hot for you to fish responsibly, but where the fish are not actually acutely being affected. So in past versions of the release programs, these were dealt with in different ways. In the FFMP 2007, there was a thermal release bank that was allocated for the purpose of promoting the ecology and preventing excessive or extended heat waves. After the FFMP was signed and accepted, DRBC's Subcommittee on Ecological Flows met and tried to develop a policy on how to implement the bank in the most efficient way possible. So in a way there, it would address the problems identified by the experts on the subcommittee, but also wouldn't run the risk of running out of water in the bank. This water in the bank is sort of a fixed number, and if it's gone, it's gone. There's no explicit provision for getting more water into the bank after it's gone. So if it's a warm summer, a warm early summer, and we run out of it by the end of July, we're going through August and early September with a lot of risk. And we could be looking back and saying, we wish we hadn't made releases as big in June and July if we're having a worse episode later in the season. And just calling out that some people on the call or some people you all know were on the SEF and provided their expertise and knowledge along with a lot of other both NGO and government personnel. This is to flesh out the table that Jeff showed from Peter earlier, and the historical release programs they're not easy to summarize because they were so complicated. Revision 1 technically had a July release of 325, but if you look closer, that 325 release was only for 2 months of the year. So on June 14th or August 16th, you were getting a 45 release, which was way too little. But it was accompanied by a 6,000 CFS day bank that was separate from the IERQ or the ERQ at that time. So this was a bank that was not associated with the ERQ. There were several revisions in between. There was a revision 4, but I'm going to skip to revision 7 here. And that has a thermal bank of 9,200 CFS days, but that's actually sort of a misnomer. Those are three different banks. There was a habitat bank, a thermal bank, an amelioration bank, and those were all specified for particular uses for particular purposes. And there was a Hale Eddy target of 225 at that time. And one thing we often hear that the East Branch had a target that was a bit aggressive that we've crept back on a little bit. So the East Branch actually was doing pretty well under Rev 7, but it was it was not a balanced approach. And with those three banks with different conditions on use, it was a very hard program to implement. That's why I'm not trying to go into it in any more depth right now. The 2007 FFMP had a base release of 325, but there was no thermal bank. So between 2007 and 2011, we did have some thermal episodes. Some of them were relatively extreme, where Lordville got up to 77 or 78 degrees. Some were relatively extended, where you had a 4 or 5 or 6 day excursion. As a result of that, New York State DEC and Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission collaborated on this, what calls the Joint Fisheries White Paper, the joint being the two agencies. And this was an iterative process where different flow tables were simulated using the DSS that existed at that time, and which one was optimizing the habitat for not only trout, but also for other species, and not only for the adult trout, but across different life stages as well. So you wouldn't want to come up with a flow regime that was benefiting only adult brown trout if it was actually making overall habitat worse for other species or for juvenile or spawning. They came up with an optimized plan of 525, which we tried to emulate in the 2011 FFMP-OST. That was the first version of the FFMP that incorporated those OST kind of iterative calculations on surplus water that Brent talked about. But at the high level tables, we were getting a 500 summertime release from Cannonsville. Again, that did not include a bank. So that 500 was definitely way better than it had been in the past. We were getting good results from it, but we still had the risk of extended or extreme thermal releases. We tried to address those on a case-by-case basis, but getting unanimous consent from the decree parties to deviate from the plan was very hard to do in the time constraints that you would have. Say, a heat wave coming up, you don't have 2 weeks to talk about it. You have to have a decision in a day or two at the very most. So because of that, when we came up to the 2007 FFMP, we went back to the bank scheme. So we have this 2,500 CFS day bank that is allocated for ecological protection and to avoid those either extended or extreme thermal events. Just looping back again to something Jeff said earlier, where the Lordville target, well, we definitely treat it as a 75 max target. In terms of the defined protection zones in the FFMP, Lordville, as you can see there, it's in between the green and the orange zones. So it's at the very bottom of the good protection level. And I want to emphasize that the description of the good protection zone there is summer water temperatures will occasionally exceed a daily maximum of 75 degrees for short periods. So a day where the max temperature is above 75 is not a failure of the FFMP. It is we're meeting the protection goal that we set out, especially being that it's on the border between good and moderate. So everywhere upstream of Lordville is a lower temperature than 75. And yes, it will occasionally exceed it. This is part of the plan as was set out by the decree parties. In practice, we do try to avoid 75-degree max. That is our design target, so that if it's greater than that, we'll release extra water, and if it's not greater than that, we won't. I just want to emphasize that it's not necessarily a failing of the plan when we have an excursion above 75. It is it's not what we're trying to do, but as I'm going to go into, the designs are complicated and imperfect, and there's a lot of sources of air that go into that. So part of the designing thermal releases to keep the temperature below 75. Why is that a challenge? These are some of the factors. Hopefully, the most major of them are listed here, but the base ones are your stream flows in the main stem, east and west and east branches, and the tribs, and the fraction of flow of that that's coming from the reservoirs. So we have a cold water volume in the reservoirs that usually sets up somewhere between May and possibly the first week of June, but and that's sort of the cold water is set up for the season at that time. Any inflow that the reservoir gets subsequent to that is probably going to be warm water, and it's going to kind of find the isotherm in the reservoir. So it's going to slide in above that cold water reservoir. But because the releases are coming from the bottom, any water that's released is depleting that cold water reserve. For Kansville, it's about 90 billion gallons, and usually we'll have about 55 or 60, about 2/3 of that. It varies from year to year. But in terms of water that is good for thermal relief, so cooler than 55 degrees, let's say, it's usually about 55, sometimes a little more. And this all depends on the conditions in the spring when it sets up, and then releases that the city makes according to the plan in April and May and early June. All these affect the temperature of the reservoir water. And then the time of travel from these reservoirs is pretty significant. Lordville is about 15 hours from Kansville, and it's about, let's say, more than that. Blanking. I don't want to give a number and it not be accurate. We're off season, so I don't have these on the tip of my tongue right now. But the time of travel has to be taken into account of when you're doing the computations. For Kansville, that 15-hour delay means that we're generally making thermal releases from about period 10 p.m. the night before until about 6 to 10 a.m. the morning of. That's what gets the cold water pulse to Lordville at the hottest part of the day. We're looking at the air temperature. So both the today's high being the design day high, and then also the previous night's low. Cool nights are our friend in the summer in terms of water temperature that can really transfer a lot of heat back out of the river into the atmosphere. We're looking at our previous day water temperature. So there's sort of an inertia there where the best predictor of tomorrow's water temperature is what today's water temperature was. We're looking at yesterday's high temperature, the morning's high temperature, and that because we're doing these designs in the middle of the day, we don't know what today's high temperature will be. So we're kind of we're shooting blind because we don't know what today's max is going to end up. The max is usually about 5 or 5:30 p.m. And that's too late to do a thermal calculation. And then finally, the Kansville and Pepacton release temperatures are already talked about. Why those are important is that as we get to the end of the season, so say we're dealing in mid-August, say, Kansville might have already released 55 billion gallons since the thermocline was set up back in, say, late April, depending on conditions. If they needed a lot of water to be released either for the CSSO, as Brent said, if there were high direct releases early in the season, sometimes they can be releasing 1,000 CFS or more for directed releases. That cold water can go fast. So late in the season, we sometimes actually get more bang from the buck for a given gallon of water out of the thermal relief bank for a release from Pepacton. It doesn't happen very often because Pepacton does have that longer time of travel. There's more time for that water to heat up both from the air and the sun. But that's something we take into account, that late in the season, Kansville might be warming up, and it's less of a cooling effect to be using warm water. The last 5 are ones that are less important, but still very important. Talk about sky cover. So obviously, the heat transfer into the water comes three ways. There's conduction, so water is being conducted from the actual stream bed itself, and to a lesser extent from groundwater flux. We'll to that in a bit. Convection, so that's heat transfer between warm air and the water. So along the surface of the water, there's heat being transferred either from the air to the water or from the water to the air. And so the sky cover is a big deal when it's a very sunny day and the sun's beating down on it. Obviously, there's a lot of radiative pressure heating it up, so it's being directly heated by the sun. Similarly, the sky cover at night, on a cloudy night, you're having less radiative loss. On a clear night, you're radiating right out into space, so you're as it's close to a black body emitter there. So it's you're losing a lot more heat from radiation from the surface of the water up into the sky on a clear night than a cloudy night. So that's why when you have these humid, warm nights that are cloudy, it really can set you up for a thermal event the next day because you're not getting any relief at night from that. Precipitation, we take that into account because depending on the amount of precipitation, you might either not need a thermal release, so it might nullify the need for a thermal release because the flow is going to go up. You're going to get 3/4 of an inch of rain. You might be getting enough runoff that a thermal release is not necessary just from the high flow. But also, you could be getting, depending on the precip type, you can be getting warm water sometimes. If you're getting rainfall in the wrong place, so on the East Branch or the Beaverkill, and that's going to be heating up the next day, you could be getting more of a warm water slug coming into the confluence and heating up the main stem. So generally in the summer, the Beaverkill is kind of our enemy. Like I know it's probably the wrong way to phrase it, but that the warm water coming in from the Beaverkill is a big factor on main stem temperatures. The length of the day and the sun angle kind of both go back to that the radiative pressure. So on days when you have a high solarity, so a lot of watts per square meter are directly heating up the water. It's not just your air temperature. You can have a day where there is a relatively lower air temperature, but the radiation is heating it up as well. I want to mention groundwater flux and temperature. So by groundwater flux, I mean whether the river is gaining from groundwater or whether it's losing to groundwater. So it's a give or take. In an unregulated stream, this is more important. USGS has a paper on, I think, the never sank above the reservoirs, where they did a more detailed analysis of the groundwater flux. So it's sort of hard to measure that directly. But they did, and they found that, as you would expect, there's a very close relationship between the groundwater quantity and temperature in the area of the groundwater that's under direct influence of the stream and the resulting stream flows and water temperature. So it's exactly as you expect from first principles, but that is kind of a source of not error, but a factor you want to consider, that if you're, especially in the early part of the summer, your groundwater levels are usually higher and cooler because they're still sort of freshened from snowmelt. You still have higher groundwater levels from that. So your base flows are higher. It can be hard to decompose a river as complicated as the Delaware into its natural base flow, its natural runoff, and its regulated releases from the reservoirs. But that groundwater flux is sort of another factor you want to consider. And then the wind speed and the humidity. So that's going to affect your convective heat transfer. So the convection, again, is what the heat transferred from on the surface of the water between the air and the water are from the water to the air. So if you have higher winds, you're going to have more convective transfer. And if you have moister air, you're going to have uh, less transfer, because you're going to have it's going to be easier for water molecules to escape from the surface into the drier air. This was a big part of the computations back under Rev 4 and Rev 7. And part of that was because they were doing their designs for basically the East Branch and the West Branch. The main stem was less of a focus back then. And wind speed was a big part of their calculations on how much to release for their targets back then. Drew, how am I on time? Am I okay on time?
Yeah, you're doing all right.
Okay. So I just have a few slides here to sort of illustrate this, that there are a lot of factors involved, that even if you had a perfect forecast of what tomorrow's, that's true, I didn't mention, all these have sort of error bars associated with them. We don't know exactly what tomorrow's air temperature would be. They'll give us a forecast that it's going to be 83 and sunny, and it could turn out to be 85 but partly cloudy. That's pretty good for a meteorologist, but for our purposes, that can make a big difference. So here, I want the takeaway to be that even if you had a perfect forecast, so even if you knew exactly what tomorrow's meteorological conditions were going to be, you still, from those two, you could not predict the water temperature perfectly. So here's a graph of all the days at Lordville, the water temperature and the flow. So as you can see, there's a lot of high days. There's a high variability of flow. These are high flows. Some of these are flood days, but most of them are not water temperature issues. The color coding on the dots is for what the temperature is. So purple is the highest. Red is still above 75. Yellow is sort of in the 74s. Blue is 73, and then below 73 is all green. So we're going to cut this graph down because we're not really interested in all these high flow days. There's fewer of them, and there's never a temperature problem on them. So we're going to zoom in on this and exclude everything that's above 4,000 CFS. So here we see that the thermal problems are almost exclusively at less than 1,600 CFS. There's a very few days where you get even a suggestion above them. And that's to be expected. If there's more water, it's much harder for the air and the sun to heat up a bigger volume of water. There's only so much energy that's being transferred from the air and the sun into the water. And so it's harder for it to get heated up the more it is. We're going to zoom in again here. And we're looking at we're zooming in again here. So just flows between 0 and 1,600 here. And so here we see that the low flows are not necessarily leading to high water temperatures. There are plenty of days where there's a low flow, and that's probably not good for all the habitat, probably not good for fishing, but it could be not a temperature problem. But we're starting to see sort of the correlation here between low flows leading to high temperatures. So it's not necessary and it's not sufficient, but there is a correlation. And here's a graph of just the air temperature and just the water temperature. So again, there are plenty of warm days that are not high water temperature days. And there are several days that are not necessarily that warm. You have days here where the water temperature ends up being above 76, but the air temperature is below 75. And that's sort of a phenomena that should be suggesting us that there are other factors besides just air temperature causing this. So here you show them all together. So the air temperature is on the left. So even if you had a perfect prediction of what the air temperature was and a perfect prediction of what the stream flow was, you still couldn't say what the water temperature is going to be. You have to take all these other factors into account. All right, so here are the graphs of how we've done in implementing this since the 2007 FFMP was in place. This first year, 2018, was before SEF had made their policies, so we were kind of winging it based on our past experience and our knowledge. We had a few days. 2019 was relatively cooler, but then 2020, we had some extended warm spells there, and we did have more events than average. That's the highest number of events we've had in a year. 2021 was we had a little warm spell earlier in the year, but then didn't. The rest of the year was pretty tame, with almost a month there where it was below 68. Also, the two lines on this are 75, so that's our Lordville target, and then the 68 degrees, which is considered by many to be an ideal temperature for trout growth and propagation. And this shows 2022, 2023, 2024. Last year was less active, but we still had two where we just went above the target. Those were either days where I think we made a release on both of those days, and it just wasn't enough. So this is the performance of it over the last 8 years shown in these graphs. And this shows our thermal bank usage over the years. So we've never run out of the bank. In 2020, we came pretty darn close because it was such an active year. But some years we've hardly used any. And so I think that's part of what some of the ideas coming from some of the angling groups about kind of merging the two banks. I don't know if you've heard people talk about this, but merging the banks and getting into a joint thermal bank, RFC or rapid flow change bank. I'd love to see what people's studies are on this and take it for discussion and consideration, but right now they're split. And so I think that's it if there's any questions.
All right. Thank you, Brenan. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Brent, for some great presentations. We're going to open up the floor to questions. You can feel free to post your questions in the chat. I see some people already have. If you'd like to voice your question, you can raise your hand. If you don't know how to do that, you click on the little heart reaction button and click raise hand, and then you'll be able to be unmuted. But I guess we'll start with the chat here because there is a question here. Carl would like to know, is there going to be an increased role in AI-driven models in the future?
I'll start with that. That's okay. So modeling is not my direct wheelhouse. I mean, I work with our modelers quite a bit, but I'm not a modeler myself. However, I do know that our modelers are utilizing machine learning, which, if I understand it correctly, is a type of AI. So we are kind of there already to a certain degree. There's certainly elements of AI that are being used in OST. I mean, who knows what the future will bring? It seems to me that every time you turn around, you're reading something about AI, that's advancing this industry or that industry. And I wouldn't be surprised if we expand upon our use of AI in the future. The cynic in me says that we're all going to be out of a job by AI in 10 years, but who knows, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's right to describe what we're trying to do here at the EC side. We're having some initiatives on machine learning, so identifying some of these variables and picking out their significance under different scenarios. And then the USGS temperature predictor, which some of you might know of. There's a link on the Office of the Delaware Rivermaster webpage that was developed using machine learning as well.
Okay, excellent. Next up, we have a question from Dan. Dan is asking, how are the 6 FFMP studies paid for? What is the estimated cost, and what agency or agencies are responsible for completing them?
I don't know, Brennan, you want to take this one or you want me to?
I'll take a crack at it.
Sure.
You can clean up my mess. I think 2 of the studies are sort of easy to answer. One of the studies is about the improvement of the Office of the Delaware River Master directed release calculation and the balancing adjustment, and ODRM is performing that. I think that's been presented at RFAC.
So.
The storage study, we're sort of relying a lot on DRBC's existing storage study. That's sort of going to be interpreted by the decree parties, but there's going to be a lot of deference to DRBC's extensive work in that zone. For the other studies, those are primarily going to be done internally by the decree parties. The sea level study is most of the actual number crunching and analysis is done by DRBC and some of their external partners. The other studies are, for the most part, in-house. The decree party joint venture, I'd say.
Yeah, no, I agree. I really have not much to add to that other than just to say that specifically for the storage study, I know DRBC is taking a lead on that. For most of it, there is one part of it with regards to the Kansville Reservoir that New York City will be paying for that portion of the storage study. But otherwise, I have nothing to add to what Brent said.
All right, excellent. Walter put in the chat, any consideration to lowering the Lordville temperature target, given the bank has never been fully used?
I don't want to say no consideration. It's been sort of considered, but I think that's sort of our habitat people in the Joint Fisheries White Paper sort of that they have a pretty good justification for using that as an acute target. I don't think they're comfortable with it being much higher than that, but at the same time, I think they realize that for a given amount of water, there's limitations on how deeply it can be used. I think the concern is if we lowered the target, then on some of those higher usage years, you would run out early, and then you would have no protection from a more acute spell later.
I can add to that. So, Walter, it might be the flip side of that. There might be more of a possibility in that it would be not to fiddle with the temperature target, but to think about the size of the bank. So Brennan mentioned earlier about, we talked to him about combining the possibilities of combining the thermal bank with the rapid flow bank. Call it what I would call would be a habitat bank, and give it maybe a little more flexibility, or we'd be in a situation where we could borrow from one and take a risk with the other one. But the ultimate answer in the conservation community's discussions is, yes, we have not exhausted the thermal bank in any given year. We got close in 2020, was it, Brendan? But,
yeah.
They're small, and what's the future hold for weather here? Well, it looks like it's maybe going to be hotter and drier. And so to the extent that there's to the extent that we could find some additional water out there, and a lot of us believe that it is out there, and that's one of the challenges for conservation communities, to figure out how to find that. The approach in the context of the banks might be to think about making those banks a little bit bigger.
Hey, Jeff, to follow up on that question is the recreational usage versus conservation usage. I heard earlier, that the IERQ is used for both. What's the percentage of recreational draw on that? I would assume it's pretty small.
Yeah, Brennan, we have some people in the room here too, Brennan. Did you hear that question?
Yeah. You mean recreational in terms of boating?
Yeah, boating, kayaking. I'd heard years ago that the downriver activities sometimes utilize that bank as well.
No, they don't have a call on the habitat bank. The thermal release bank is really for habitat purposes.
I think what Rich might be talking about is maybe the extraordinary needs bank, Brennan. Aren't there times where you know, you have these special events or needs for water, a need for water on an episodic basis. And isn't there at least a possibility that essentially there could be a petition for an extraordinary needs bank for any particular use that isn't one of the banks, you know, one of the specific banks?
There could certainly be a petition for that. I think that that's a need from the community. It would be considered. I can't
So I
talk
guess
to.
the answer, Rich, is they
No.
don't use,
Okay.
there's no
Okay.
there's no recreational IERQ.
And he mentioned boating earlier, so that sounds like something too that.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Let me jump in on that a second. I guess what I meant by saying that there's no release specifically for boating. It's just that there are people who do boat on the Delaware, right? They kayak and maybe canoe or whatnot. So they may have an interest in how the water is used, but we don't make any releases specifically for boating. I'm sorry if I confused anyone.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for clarifying.
Landis has a problem with that, right?
All right, thank you. Moving on to the next question in the chat. Can someone comment on the impact of the saving of water going to New York City from the aqueduct repair project on the modeling?
I'll try to field that first. So as folks know, there's a leak in the Delaware Aqueduct underneath the Hudson River. There is a planned project to repair that, so that there won't be a leak. I forget what the number is that's leaking off the top of my head. If someone knows it, let me know. I don't, at the present moment, I think that water is going to be set aside for water supply, but I don't know for sure. I mean, I think maybe there's opportunities for discussion about it, but I really am not sure what that water will be utilized for other than water supply.
Yeah, I've always viewed it as it will be increasing storage, so we will be more likely to be on higher tables,
There you go.
and that's good for these purposes.
Okay, thank you. Another one from Carl: is every decision reactive versus proactive? And then I think maybe a follow-up: will NYC ever turn to alternative sources for water supplies, such as Philly using the two local rivers for drinking water supply? What role does the Hudson play?
Okay, I can try to field that. I'll answer the second question because I'm not quite sure. I might need more clarification on the first part of it. But as far as the Hudson goes, we don't take water directly from the Hudson. The Hudson River, doesn't have the water quality that's adequate for our purposes. We do have a pump station along the Hudson River, but that's to be utilized only in extreme emergency events. Basically, for fire suppression and things like that to get water down to the city for those purposes. So at this present moment, we have no plans to access the Hudson River for drinking water supply. As of right now, we feel that, the present reservoirs that we have are adequate for our purposes, so we don't look to be expanding in any capacity.
Hey, Brent, I can pile on to that question. At the RFAC meeting, it was mentioned that there's some sort of study underway to expand Cannonsville Reservoir.
Okay, I can
talked about
speak to that a little bit, sure. So, that's actually, I alluded to it earlier. It's part of the storage study that's going on as part of the FFMP studies. DRBC is looking at several different options in the lower basin, mostly old quarries. The idea you can fill the quarries and use the water during drought conditions to put it back into the river. We're also looking to see if there's an opportunity to raise the Cannonsville Dam, which in turn would raise the pool level, to see if that extra storage could be utilized for purposes downstream, right? So for salinity repulsion or for other purposes. We're still working on contracting for that. I want to make clear this is not a construction project. It's just a study to see if it's even feasible. And it hasn't even begun yet. We're a ways off before that study even begins, but we've been talking about it. There's contract language in the process being made.
Yeah, I can address reactive versus proactive. I think we're generally proactive in terms of we're designing for the future. To some extent, it includes a reactive portion, and that if I'm designing and Tuesday, I think it's gonna my prediction is for it to be 72.4, and it comes out to be 73.5. and Wednesday I predict it's going to be 74.2 and it comes out to be 74.8, then I'm taking that into account, that we're kind of trending warm. Like what my math, which is based on past observations, is telling me it actually has an error under real conditions in the last 2 days. I'm going to take that into account when I'm doing my design the next day. So if I get a design calculation of 74.8, I might say, well, I've missed low the last 3 days. That you sort of make an adjustment for that, because it does trend cool or hot depending on the time of year and all these other conditions that I mentioned. So that's somewhat reactive. And similarly, I think the rule curves for the reservoirs are proactive in terms of they want to set us up, like we're making decisions based on what we will see over the next month or through the next June 1st, but they're also reactive in that they respond to precipitation events. So if there's a big storm, we switch over into L1 spill mitigation mode and make bigger releases. I see another question here about the slack or provision for adjustment for a possible probable warming trend. And yes, all the FFMP studies do have a climate change sea level rise component in them. That was one of the criteria that we're evaluating all these with. And DRBC has done a lot of work on sea level rise. They presented on that in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, I see the next question here. Drew, I'm not sure if you guys are having audio problems. I can't hear you guys, but I'll just read down to the next question here. The next question says, what is the status of the tunnel? I'm assuming you mean the Delaware Aqueduct that goes underneath the Hudson River. So yeah, so simply put, that project has been delayed. The reason it was delayed is that we had a window period with the contractor to do the work. And unfortunately, we passed that window. We weren't able, the conditions didn't allow us to do it. Basically, it was too dry. We wouldn't have been able to get through the season with adequate water supplies, with the Delaware system not as accessible to us. So we put that project on hold. We have to go out to rebid now with some additional, to get the contract renewed again. So that takes time. My understanding is it probably, our best case scenario, it might be reactivated again. Reactivating in the sense that we'll try to do the project again in like 2031, I believe is the time period that we're looking at right now.
Thanks, Brent. I see the next question is someone able to make requests for releases from the thermal mitigation bank if I'm not available? And yes, we have other people in our section who are trained to do these calculations. We did just get a new hire, someone fresh out of school that we are training up to have a more thorough and deep bench. So signs are pointing up.
I will say that Brenan is irreplaceable though, so let's hope he doesn't go anywhere.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I'll read the next question. It says, for the 2028 FFMP renewal, what is the entity that will be completing the synthesis study, compilation of all the other studies, and is that required to complete by 2028? So kind of like the other studies, the plan right now is for us to do it in-house with the different decree parties and DRBC assisting. That's the present plan right now. Again, we're still preparing to scope the synthesis study. We haven't gotten to that point yet. And the end goal is to have all these studies, including the synthesis study, available and done by 2028 in order to do an FFMP renewal. Now, that might be wishful thinking a little bit because we are perhaps, if I'm being honest, a tiny bit behind with the work that we're supposed to do. But our goal is to get this completed by 2028. And Brandon, please add anything if you'd like to.
No, I think we're making steady progress. It is it sometimes feels slow, and I understand it can be a bit opaque, but we are grinding it out. We all know this is a very important work. It's high stakes, and it's an uncertain future, and we want to be able to be in the best position we can for preparation.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you, Brenan. Can you guys hear us okay now?
Yep, can hear you now.
Sorry about that. Next question from Jim Serio. Looking at the graphs and tables, given the current conditions, do you expect releases from Cannonsville to increase 100? Timely question.
I'm not sure. I mean, actually, it's kind of funny you bring this up because Jeff had called me this morning to see if we thought Cannonsville was going to spill. And at the time, I said I didn't think we were. But the weather's dynamic, right? So it's now looking like there might be a possibility for Cannonsville to reach spill level later this weekend. As far as releases go, I guess it depends on how far up we go with in the storage zones. That's really all I can say to that. Kind of depends.
All right. Thanks, Brent. We have probably time for one or two more questions if anybody has them.
Talking about sediment. Yeah.
Is there any plan for getting rid of some of the silt sediment in the reservoir to increase storage?
To my knowledge, that's not a project at the moment. That's not to say there won't be one in the future, but at the present moment, to my knowledge, there's not a project to do that.
Not to speak out of course, but I think the new bit, the not new anymore, the revised bathymetry that USGS performed on Cannonsville back in 2022, it didn't seem like there was that much storage loss from siltation. I think the revised was like only down 1 or 1.5 billion gallons over 50 or since 1963. So I think maybe it's not as concerning as other ones might be in other areas. But I don't
No.
think there was
Is that the same
that
for
storage.
Canada?
That was Cannonsville.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that the same for Pepacton?
I don't. This was a while ago. USGS has a paper on the new bathymetry, but again, I don't think there was that much storage. Like the total PCN storage only went down like 2 billion gallons or something. It was not that big a change.
I'll just also add as a point. I know this reservoir is in the Delaware system, but in the Shokan, there was some concern about silting. And I think they did a study a while ago which showed that, kind of like Brennan was saying, whatever deposition was pretty negligible for as far as storage was concerned. So again, I know that Ashokan is not the Delaware system, but just as a point of reference.
Okay. Seeing that there's no more questions in the chat, I think we're good to adjourn here. Thank you, Brent. Thank you, Brenan. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you to all the attendees. We hope to come out of this, knowing a little bit more than we did before. And certainly appreciate everybody's interest in the flexible flow management program. So thank you for attending, and hope everybody has a great night.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Very much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.